rehabilitation of roads and everything, not just in the cities, but in the rural areas and everything. So you see again.
So if I'm to understand you, before we got into the specifics of massive infrastructure expansion, so I mean the strategies were in layers, revenue mobilization, and then you
have to fix the macro. Have to make sure that to support your expenditure, which will promote the growth, you must be able to generate sufficient revenue for the economy. And generating sufficient revenue for the economy means that you must put people back to work. You must put people who are returning from Nigeria, who were returning from Nigeria at the time, back to work.
Okay.
Right? You must put farmers whose farms had been devastated. And that's where the resources of ERP comes in. That's where the resources of the World Bank, the resources of the IMF, comes in. Despite your conditionality, you need it. So, but some of the conditionality, frankly, is saying, for example, your tax to GDP ratio is too low. So we'll help you fix the revenue institutions. And as a condition for giving you money, you must bring in revenue of so much.
Okay.
But of course, the part that hurts most is that, then it says things like, okay, you are not bringing enough revenue. You are not cutting your quota according to your size, so you must reduce expenditure.
I asked the question with regards to the systematic approach, because I wanted to know if the revenue inflows was the reason for which we saw the infrastructure expansion by the late President.
It's not just a revenue inflow. You also switch expenditures. If you are spending so much on consumption, you don't grow because you are just consuming. The multiplier effect is not working. So you put money back into infrastructure. You put money back into reducing your debt, like the sinking fund that we established. You put money aside when times are good, when commodity prices are high. That's the meaning of the stabilization fund, so that when you have crises like COVID, the way we went first, the first funds that we took were from the stabilization fund, which was contributed during the MERS Mahama substantially back then. We didn't add much to it. So it's a package that you put together. You take measures to improve revenue, but you take measures to also streamline your expenditure. And I was explaining that it is that aspect that gives austerity its bad name, because you are forced to realign expenditure. Sometimes you are forced to cut expenditure because you are borrowing to finance that expenditure, right? So until you can, generate your own revenue, then you must reduce the borrowing. But it brings short-term pain because then you are forced, to put money into vital sectors. People have been, let's say, spending another. But ultimately, then it gets to. Now,
but did we borrow then? Did we borrow?
Yeah, we did borrow. We did borrow. That's what went into infrastructure. But when you borrow, you must have the revenue, to pay down the debts, and you must and pay the interest. But other legacies which I like to mention specifically, which people can associate, we may take them for granted today. From the bushfires to when the cocoa trees were rehabilitated through, again, the economic recovery program and the rest, there was a difficulty of paying cocoa farmers, which was a long-standing issue, right? So what we call the cocoa loans, which cocoa borders, is a legacy of Jerry John Rawlings and his team, because it started in 1993, 94. That was when the first cocoa board went to the international markets to borrow for the first time. And since then, you will agree with me that cocoa farmers, don't have to worry that when I sell to cocoa board, I will not get my money. All right, that is because cocoa board took the produce, sold it, borrowed against the produce, and brought the money to pay them. But if you mismanage that process, if you mismanage, when you go and borrow, you mismanage the process, right? Then you cannot go back to borrow. And the fact that cocoa board is able to borrow at LIBOR plus 2%, which is better than even the state sovereign bond, is a legacy of that era. Another legacy which we want to talk about.
But how did that directly impacted on the livelihood of the cocoa farmers then?
there were difficulty in paying cocoa farmers because remember there was a lot of, first of all, you had to put a plan in place to rehabilitate the cocoa farms because they had been burnt. The massive cocoa, and I know that for a fact because it was at a point some of us were in school and as parents, my parents and grandparents were cocoa farmers. So you felt it directly. So if you ask me, I would probably not be sitting here before Cocoa Board scholarship if it had to take, because no money was coming home. Things were, that bad, around that time. And we're dependent as a family on cocoa farms. So that's one practical example. So the ability to rehabilitate the cocoa farms, and that's where you get money again from the World Bank in particular.
That's right.
To rehabilitate the farms. But you have to manage it well so that when you sell the cocoa, right, and you go and take a loan, one, you should use a loan to pay the cocoa farmer and use the produce which they produce to pay the loan. If you diverted the loan for other purposes, as we've been like ESLA, if I take a recent example, ESLA, which is the design, energy sector levy, which was designed to help the banking sector and the energy sector, which despite significant inflows like 20 billion plus, still we have depositors and others who have not been. You cannot go back for another ESLA bond, and that's why we are not able to use it.
But is that what the Rawlings administration did? I mean, in terms of managing the situation, and what did that culminate into, if they did?
They did, because the evidence is there.
And I'm saying that into what?
I'm saying that what they did was that they established the discipline, right, not to misapply that cocoa money, and principally to use it to pay the cocoa farmer, because you are borrowing, you are borrowing against the back of their toil and their work. Of course, part of the money is used to do other things, and that is why you understand the vision of cocoa roads. Why part of that money was being channeled into cocoa roads, because it's not just about the produce, because you have to carry the cocoa on your head for long distances when you could just do a rural road, which would alleviate. That is what the alleviation of poverty is all about. That's where the tiredness and everything you're talking about. That's where growth, because all of a sudden food does not rot in the bush, not just the cocoa, but the other produce that is produced, because vehicles are able to go in and cut it, and that is what development is all about. But I'm saying that the discipline to establish that structure, that financing structure from 1993 all the way, and of course to the credit of President Kufuor and others, all this way, but that is why it is a worrying when you begin to hear some of the things taking place, being said, about the facts have not come out, Cocoa Board and others, that we need to protect. I'm saying this is a legacy. The fact that you have the stability for paying farmers, you have the stability, you now are able to borrow to do cocoa roads, this is a legacy.
And so it became a blueprint.
A blueprint, and it remains. Every year we go to Parliament with the same structure, modified, to borrow and pay cocoa farmers.
Absolutely.
Then you have GMPC. If I may do just another two words.
Sure,
so examples here.
That's the Ghana National Petroleum
Corporation.
Okay.
Whose first chief executive, of course, I believe the first was Chechu Chikata, of course, right? Who brought in the first rig, who brought in the exploration and everything. That was again under the Rawlings leadership.
First rig,
yes,
and then exploration.
And then exploration, the mapping, and the rest, which culminated in Jubilee.
Okay.
But before Jubilee, remember, there was the salt pond,
okay.
Which, did not produce as much as
But had we found oil?
That's salt pond. We found oil in salt pond. And the mapping and others suggested that there was oil in the basin where Jubilee, President Kufuor then came in.
Okay, so then we had it all figured out. It was just a matter of drilling it all.
The point that I think it had been known from colonial era, that there must be oil there, because you have Cote d'Ivoire and then you have Nigeria. And that's and so that whole basin, and today you have Sierra Leone and others, or prospecting. But I'm saying that the establishment of a corporation, to take it as a vision and to get it out, from the soil, is a legacy of the Rawlings era. Right. You may have, other, ministries of energy and others doing the work, but the vision to have, so when you talk about the oil and
so
gas,
you credit Rawlings with a vision.
Of course, he founded it. Everything we are talking about is the foundation. Who laid the foundation for the thing? And I'm saying that if you look at, the devastation that occurred to the economy, from the 70s to the early 80s, and we have visible signs of many of the things that I'm talking about. Whether you're talking about, RGB, whether you are talking about VAT, whether you are talking about GMPC, whether you are talking, even the banking sector collapsed. From the 70s coming to the 80s, the banking sector collapsed.
Tell me about it.
Of course, it did, because people borrow, and when the economy goes down, they cannot repay, right? Just as the global financial crisis is a situation. And that's when the vision to create something called the Non-Performing Assets Recovery Trust, which some of us felt should have been the alternative, to our recent banking crisis and the ESLA.
Wow.
Because the Non-Performing Assets Recovery Trust was a model that we used, to put the VRA, bad loans, which they are taking from the banks, and ring fence them, right? And say we shall use ESLA to repay, the loan, to the bank. So you substitute. So you substitute the credit of the state through the taxes it's collecting for VRA. And the same thing was going to be done. The model started with what you call the non-performing assets, which recapitalized even the central bank itself at the time, and the commercial banks, and, so I'm saying you can see the breadth of things that we're talking about, the rehabilitation of the railway track. I think a lot of people would recall, the late President Rawlings sitting on the tracks while the workers, you remember, stretching out.
I don't know if we have that shot. Maybe we could show
and giving,
we could show our viewers as well.
That picture was taken because he was out there. That's my recollection. I believe that those who were closer to the scene would confirm the story. He was out there, and the World Bank president had come to Ghana, and they decided to meet in the field.
Wow.
That's
in the field.
In the field. That's when that picture was taken. That's my recollection.
Interesting.
Of it. So you see his passion.
Why in the field?
Because he had gone to work with them, he had a schedule to be there, to work, he's often on the scene.
Yes.
Right. And so it was scheduled that the World Bank, of course, was providing the money for rehabilitation. So come and see what we are doing.
What we are doing.
For yourself. Right. That is the man. And you could see, so we talk about the infrastructure. That's part of the rehabilitation of the infrastructure. The Kwame Nkrumah infrastructure that was, broken down. So I spoke about education, the fact that the rehabilitation of the economy, made those who returned from Nigeria stay, and the teachers went back to the classroom.
Culminating into job creation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Job creation, education. Because most of those who left, the majority were teachers because of our trainings, but they came back. Otherwise, our education would have gone down.
Was it just about employing teachers? I mean, in terms of the growth of education under a Rawlings era, or there was more to it?
We were losing the teachers to Nigeria. So it wasn't just about employment, because things were so difficult. Even the payment, salary increases and things were becoming a difficulty. So people just took off. Those who could go to Europe went, but the majority went to Nigeria because they had an oil boom at the time. But by the time they came back, the rehabilitation was underway, and the economy was becoming attractive again, to the extent that most of the teachers that came back went back into the classroom.
Okay, I want you to hold that thought for me. When we come back from the break, we'll be looking at how all these, of course, the blueprint that Honorable Setekbe talks about in terms of the legacy of the late President, Flight Lieutenant General John Rawlings, how we can build on all this as a nation as we move forward. You're watching XYZ tonight. As and when we have the feed as well, we'll connect to the Kama Conference Center. Stay with us.
peace of mind is very essential in your journey to success. For Akwesi Papa, peace of mind means having a proper covering over his family. Literally. For Araba, aka Injection Mama, it's about having the funds to complete her advanced nursing course. And as for Corporal Odami, it's as simple as reporting on time for his shifts. Sometimes all you need is a simple push. At Needs Microfinance, we have tailor-made loan packages for salaried workers under the Controller General's Department. With the low interest rate and quick wahala-free process, you are guaranteed of a timely solution to get back that peace of mind, literally in 30 minutes. Needs Microfinance. Growing with you.
This is XYZ Tonight with me, Prince Minkai. Let me just run you through some messages as we continue our conversation with regards to Rawlings's economic legacies with the former finance minister, Seth Terkper, here on the show tonight. Some of your messages. Positive Change is watching us from Medina. And you say, I kept hearing NDC MPs talk about national interest. We're not discussing Parliament this evening. Solomon Tay says, more fire. More fire could have also come with other suggestions. Mensa K. Mensa also says that, please, can I get Seth Terkper's number? Charles Fierson is also saying that Honorable Seth Terkper is unlike the other gentleman in white who only loves to, deal with Ejapa. Okay, so those are some of your messages that are coming in on Facebook. You can connect with us on Twitter as well, and of course on YouTube. His Excellency John Dramani Mahama is about speaking, but just briefly, Honorable, how do we build on the foundation the late President has built or laid for us?
Let me say that quickly, that the members of the NDC should not allow themselves for our initiatives as NDC to be put down again. And let me give examples. What we have to do is what we were doing. We found oil, and we said, let us not use oil the same way we had used cocoa and gold. So if you remember the late Professor Mills, the Petroleum Revenue Management Act came in, and he said, structure, let's put a structure in place so that we put part of the money aside for future generations, because the oil will end one day. Let's put part of the money aside for what we call the stabilization fund, so that when times are good, we put money down. When times are bad, then we dip into it. The evidence is COVID. $250 million that was used for COVID. The bulk of it was a contribution by that. That's how you build a nation. Sinking fund. The problem we were having was we were borrowing and not paying down the debt. So we decided to put money aside, and we used 500 million to pay down the first sovereign bond.
And so we need to build on this.
We need to build on some of these things.
Okay.
So we shouldn't allow ourselves, like Nkrumah, like Rawlings, to be told that the initiatives that we are implementing, will be derided into whatever, and yet still they persist.
Very well.
The sinking fund is there. It is not being used the way infrastructure fund that we established and whatever. These are the legacies.
So we must insist on them.
We must insist that these are good policies. We must not allow ourselves for somebody to tell us that these are bad policies. Because why have they not been dismantled?
Honorable Seth Terkper, I want to thank you very much for joining us on the program today, XYZ Tonight. We're done with XYZ Tonight, but let's cross over now to the Kama Conference Center, where former President John Dramani Mahama is speaking.